markets with a large or predominantly Chinese population, which are the most important users and consumers of shark fin. We segment the consumers and we look at an attitudinal segmentation. It means that our segmentation is not necessarily based on social demographics, but we look at attitudes. What difference one group versus another in terms of attitude. Because attitudes is what needs to be addressed by different messaging. And of course, by understanding messages, we can address those by looking at the motivations, the drivers, but also the inhibitors, the deterrents of consumption of shark fin soup. And where required or where appropriate, we look at market comparisons. So what are the differences and similarities between the different market surveys? And to see, do we need or can we adopt the same campaign, the same interventions across the 4 markets, or do we have to make differentiations? So talking about these markets, so these are the markets surveyed. We looked at mainland China, about Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And then specifically, we also did qualitative research in a number of cities. We had focus groups in Singapore, Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Kaohsiung in Taipei and Taiwan, Shanghai and Beijing, to see whether there are any differences across those locations, across those cities, to see, again, do we need the same campaigns? Do we have the same messaging across the board, or do we have to make differentiations? And in the research design, this is again still how we do it. We have 3 major components. Now, first of all, we had a look at a review of earlier surveys. And in fact, a lot of studies has been done about shark fin consumption. So we need to see how we can build on those surveys rather than reinventing the wheel. We looked at surveys done by ADM Capital Foundation, Bloom, WildAid, Shark Fin Foundation, WWF, Traffic, GlobeScan, and others. We have, I think, in total more than 30 different surveys which has been done about shark fin consumption, and to see what we could learn from that. Building on this literature review, we deployed qualitative research. In this case, we had focus groups with consumers in those 7 cities, which we mentioned before, 8 different groups. And in those focus groups, 8 people in each group, we had a mix of heavy users, so people who frequently consume shark fin soup, between occasional users, also a few rejectors. And then some elderly people, some younger people, some males, some females. We really had a mix of different consumers to get a good conversation between the different consumers of shark fin soup. And then lastly, we look at the quantitative research, and as you can see here, these are really large numbers. We interviewed more than 8,000 people, which is a massive number of respondents for quantitative research. We did it online, which is by far the most cost-effective and the most efficient way of doing research. And out of those 7,000 interviews, about half were consumers of shark fin soup, particularly 1,695 in China, and then 600 each in about Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore. So again, a massive quantitative survey to go into very robust results. Now, since we have done a lot of earlier surveys, what is the comparison? Now, each survey is different. Each survey asks in a different manner how and where and how frequently people have consumed shark fin. So it's quite difficult to compare the key metrics, in the key metric, for example, past 12 months consumers, one-on-one, because if the question is a bit differently, you get different results. So our results, we believe, are very accurate, very robust. It doesn't mean that other results are not, but it's not always to compare them exactly on a one-to-one basis. What can be compared, however, is to look at patterns, to look at types of consumers, to look at the reasons for consumption, the drivers, to see what messaging work and what messaging may not work. And from there again, what is relevant for the consumers, what can be used in intervention strategies by NGOs and governments. So this is the overview of the survey, how we did it. And from those, we come to the different parts of the results. And again, first we look at who. What are the people who are consuming on a regular or irregular basis shark fin soup? And predominantly, how can we segment them? And a segment is a group of people with homogeneous behavior and homogeneous attitudes. And by looking at different segments and by distinguishing one segment versus another, we can look at different intervention and messaging strategies. So, who are consuming shark fin? Let's look at that first. And in general, I'm going to give you an overview of the 4 markets, as you can see here. If you see a green arrow, it's statistically different from the total group if, upwards, and if you see a red arrow, it's statistically less than the total group. So those arrows show statistical differences. If you don't see an arrow, then the differences are not statistical significant. Let's first look at gender. And if you look at mainland China, so of the general population, 49% of the total population above 18 years old is female and 51% it's male. And actually an interesting finding here is that relatively more females are consumers of shark fin soup than males. It's 54% for the females and 46% for the males. And that has something to do very likely with the age as well. In general, women are a bit older comparatively across China, and that's why the elderly people are more the consumers of shark fin as well. So in China, we see slightly more females than males consuming shark fin soup. That's not the case for Taiwan. It's exactly the same, the general population as the past 12 months consumers. And for us, past 12 months consumers is the most relevant measurement. You also can look at people who have consumed ever in their life shark fin soup. That can have been 10 years ago and a very occasionally one, so that's relatively less important. Past 12 months, it's relatively quite active consumer. In Hong Kong, we see more or less the same thing. Most of the population is, the shark fin soup consumption is the same as the general population as it is in Singapore. So across the region, we don't see a lot of difference in gender. In China, a few more females. If we look to age, however, we see more of a distinction. What you can see here, again, the top horizontal bar are the general consumers. So you can see here, on average, people are 43.3 years old. However, if you look to the past 12 months consumers, younger people relatively consume less shark fin soup, and elderly people consume more shark fin soup. It won't surprise you, but you can see here the clear distinction between the average age. In China, the shark fin soup consumers are on average almost 6 years older than in the other parts, which is a quite substantial number. That's more or less the same in Taiwan. Again, less consumption by younger people, more consumption by elderly people. Same pattern in Hong Kong, although it's less distinction. And one of the reasons is that in Hong Kong, the incidence of people consuming shark fin, it's higher as in other markets. The frequency is less, but the incidence is higher. So most people have at least consumed once shark fin soup in the past 12 months. And then again in Singapore, more or less the same prevalence again, slightly elderly people compared to the general population. So gender, hardly any difference. In age categories, yes, there is a difference. Shark fin soup consumers are older than the general population. It won't surprise you. I'm sure you've read it before, you know this, but it's being confirmed here by our research. Now, looking more specifically at consumer segmentations, actually we did look at different demographics and social demographic variables. We didn't see a lot of distinction. Shark fin soup consumers are not very distinctive in terms of social demographics. They are a bit older, but it's the same gender, and also they are relatively slightly richer, having a higher income than non-consumers, but that's more because they go more frequently to restaurants and to occasions where you can consume shark fin soup. What actually is more relevant and how we focus our presentation on is the type of consumers in terms of attitude. And in our analysis, we distinguish three different groups. We look at rejectors, so those people who have either consumed shark fin soup in the past or in the past year, but have stopped doing so, and definitely intend to decrease consumption or to stop consumption overall. So past consumption was mostly driven by social pressure. Those people, rejectors, consume shark fin soup because they felt it was necessary in the social circumstances they were in, mostly in wedding or in business banquets. A large group, and this is a very important group, are the persuadable consumers. So these people consume shark fin soup not very frequently and more occasionally. And the majority of those people, and I'm talking here across the board, across the four markets, a majority of those people consume shark fin soup and intend to less in the future. Their past consumption, it's mostly driven by tradition and also partly by social pressure. And then the last, more, we call it a hardcore group, the DieHard consumers. Those are active consumers. Consumers who intend to consume shark fin soup as well in the future, as they've done in the past. And their past consumption was mostly driven by the unique aspects of shark fin soup, by taste and quality, but also, as we will see a bit later on, by tradition and by heritage. This is the overall picture. But if you look at the four markets specifically, we see the segments or representation by market. So in China, we have relatively less rejectors, more persuadable consumers, and a pretty large DieHard consumer group. So China actually, on one hand, we see a quite distinctive picture versus Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore on the other hand. Those three markets are differently as the Chinese market. So if you think about intervention strategies in campaigns, using celebrities, using messaging, we have to distinguish China on one side and then Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore on the other side. And each of these, what's important across these four markets, they all have a large percentage of persuadable consumers. So consumers who consume shark fin soup, but don't necessarily have to do so or feel they have to do so. People we can convince to change their behavior. Looking more specifically at each of those groups. So let's zoom in about the three different groups. Who are the rejectors? What kind of people are they? How do they look like? And why are they as they are? First of all, the consumption behavior, because we look at attitudes and behavior. Those people, the consumption rejectors, they don't longer consume shark fin soup. Actually, it's a large number of people who have stopped consuming and who don't intend to consume in the near future. Their past consumption was more occasional and called passive. One of the most important distinctions in our survey is that we looked at the difference between active consumers and passive consumers. And passive consumers are people who consume mostly at wedding banquets or family reunions, mostly driven by social pressure, tradition, and influenced by the more elderly, DieHard consumers of shark fin soup. So they are in occasion, they get it offered, but they wouldn't do it actively. And their opinions are mostly driven by environmental concerns. They don't like this whole idea of eating shark fin. They are familiar with the idea of shark finning, and the main deterrents which we prompted in the survey itself, and I will show you a bit later what kind of images we show to the consumers. They are being prompted by the conservation, by cruelty, in a messaging that sharks may get extinct later on if we continue to eat soups in large quantities. These people are ready to support some campaigns on social media and repost messaging. So these people might be the advocates to change other people to stop consuming shark fin soup. And if you see here the icons on the right-hand side, they are really the main conclusions. Of course, there's a lot more details in the report itself, but just to conclude on these people, the main occasions of consumption are social occasions. 9 out of 10 intend to consume less or stop consuming at all in the future. The main drivers are tradition and social pressure, and the deterrents, as being captured in the survey, it's conservation and cruelty. And later on, I will drill more into the whole issues of drivers and deterrents. That's one group. Then we talk to the next group, which is persuadable consumers. And of course, these people are important. All people are important, but these are the ones we call perhaps the low-hanging fruits, the people which we can change most quickly. People who are persuadable, if we bring along the right messaging, getting the right campaigns. And these people are the largest consumers in all markets, perhaps except in Taiwan, where we have more DieHard consumers, rejectors. And in those most occasional consumers, they consume shark fin mostly at wedding banquets. Yeah, this is very common across the 4 markets. Wedding banquets and at restaurants with reunions, more specifically in mainland China. 7 out of 10 intend to consume less shark fin soup in the future. And their opinions are mostly being driven by either by peer pressure and tradition, but also some of them appreciate the good taste, as they call it, of shark fin soup. Their messaging which resonates strongest with them, it's across the extinction of the species. And this is summarized again quite similar as the people from the people we saw before, rejectors. There is of course a fluent overlap between going over from rejectors to persuadable consumers. And these people again mostly consume at wedding banquets with friends and reunions at restaurants. It's a tradition, it's uniqueness, and again, most people intend to stop shark fin consumption. So these people, the persuadables and rejectors, are quite similar. It's more the degree of to what extent they'd like to reject shark fin soup. The DieHard consumers are different people. They are active consumers. Yeah, they really choose to consume shark fin soup. They choose it themselves on the menu. They choose it themselves when they go to restaurants. And if they are responsible for a wedding banquet or another banquet, they purposely include shark fin soup. So these are the hardcore users. And these are the people we need to perhaps address differently. And also, if addressed them differently in campaigns and interventions, they have different opinions. They use shark fin soup because they believe it's good as a health benefit. It's a culinary treat and it's a part of a tradition. If you want to stop them, the deterrence is more the legality. So if governments are forbidding it, and perhaps also practical culinary barriers, it's a bit hard to cook. The message of extinction has less impact to them because they believe it's luxury as status, and that matters more to them than extinction on itself. The drivers here are the uniqueness, the conservation, and the legal points, the legal government ban. It's the reason why people might stop consuming shark fin soup, but they won't do it voluntarily. And as you can see here, 8 out of 10 continue to intend to consume shark fin soup in the future. So these are, as we call, the DieHard consumers. For the type of people, let's more look at the consumption indicators and behavior itself. So what do people consume and where? Let's again, first an overview across the region. This chart, like a lot of other charts, has a lot of information, but what you see here, the white part are the non-users. So you can see 53% in mainland China, 42% in Taiwan, 30% in Singapore, and 14% in Hong Kong have never consumed shark fin soup in their life. So those are non-consumers. The light blue part are the people who consume shark fin soup in the past 12 months. And the dark blue part have consumed it once in their lifetime or a bit more, but not in the past 12 months. As you can see here, in Hong Kong, most people by far have at least consumed shark fin soup in the past 12 months, or at least once in their lifetime. And in China, it's a lot lower. So Hong Kong has the highest number, and China has the lowest incidence level. But if you look to only those people who consume shark fin soup, we see a different picture. So these are the current consumers. So we saw a lower number of consumers in China, but those consumers consume more frequently. And we go from left to right. The red boxes are the people who consume 6 times, so once every 2 months or more frequently, shark fin soup. And the green boxes are the people who did it only once in the past 12 months. So in China, we have less people consuming shark fin soup, but those people who consume more frequently. And then the markets of Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore are pretty consistent with each other. And then you can see occasional consumers, the average frequency in the past 12 months is 2.8 in China. So about every 4 months, once a bowl of shark fin soup. In the other 3 markets is relatively 1.7 for Hong Kong and 1.9 for Taiwan and Singapore. That was the consumption currently. Look at past consumption, you can see a larger number of people who actually have stopped consuming shark fin soup in Taiwan and Singapore. So it's quite a large number of people who stopped consuming shark fin soup. And if you ask people, why did you stop? What are the reasons you stopped consuming? Environmental and conservation reasons are mentioned most frequently anywhere. Interesting, in China, also a reason followed by Taiwan is that it's being seen as expensive as well. So people stop consuming shark fin soup because it's seen as too expensive. Other reasons are cruelty of shark finning and the decline of the population of shark. What you will see later on when we are exposing the consumers to specific messaging, this is pre-asking of the messages. So we just give them information here. Past consumption, and then we follow by a future consumption. Would you intend to consume in the future? And then you can see here that would definitely probably eat more frequently. China, again, is very different from the other 3 markets. So you see in China, 1/3 of the people actually expect or want to continue even more shark fin soup versus only 7% of Hong Kong and 10% Taiwan and 12% of Singapore. And on the other hand, the people who would consume less, it's almost 2/3 of all people in Hong Kong, Taiwan or Singapore. The occasions, and as we've seen before, so shark fin soup consumption, it's being consumed as social occasions. It's either in weddings, almost everywhere, or in friendly unions, in family events at restaurants. There's all social occasions. It's not a type of dish where people go particularly to a restaurant in order as a culinary dish on itself. Shark fin soup, it's a culinary tradition. It's part of a social event, as you can see very clearly on those top 10. And people, of course, could mention more than one reason. And again, what we saw earlier for China, the frequency is higher over there, and also the number of occasions is being mentioned more frequently. The decision to include shark fin soup, actually you can see here, did you decide yourself? You see in China, again, this is higher as in the other markets. I'm speeding a bit up because otherwise I won't be able to end on time and you won't be able to ask questions. We ask people as well, what kind of replacement dishes could you use for shark fin soup, assuming shark fin soup would not be available for a traditional banquet. And you can see here, it depends a bit per country. In China, most people would choose for sea cucumber. In Hong Kong, it would be crab meat. In Taiwan, it would be lobster. And in Singapore, it would be fish maw. It was not suggested by ourselves, by us, the researchers, or by the NGOs like Traffic and WWF work with. These were ideas from the consumers more themselves. So what you can see here, particular different choices for each country based on the culinary dishes there. Now I'm going to come to the perhaps most important part, or the most interesting, and perhaps also the most complicated part of our survey. Why do people consume shark fin soup, even if they know it's bad for the environment, it may even extinct the species, it's bad for it, it's very cruel, but people do it anyway. So let's look at the drivers, but also the deterrents, reason not to consume shark fin soup. I have to give you a few slides here on the methodology. So we're using here specifically, and I do it quite quickly, we call it a maximum differentiation. And normally what a lot of researchers do, they have a statement, and then they ask a respondent, the people who participate in the survey, to give a score on the statement from 1 to 10. Do you agree or disagree? If you agree fully, you give it a 10, for example, and if you disagree fully, you give it a 1. What happens then in reality in the survey is that a lot of people agree with most of the statements, because basically that's, yeah, most people agree with the statement being placed. What we do in our survey, and that's why it's called maximum differentiation, we give people in total 25 statements, and we put on the screen 5 statements in 5 batches. So I'm going to give you 5 different statements, and you have to select the one statement you agree most with, and the one statement you agree least with. In this manner, we create more differentiation, because people have to choose the most agreeable and the least agreeable. In those things, we have a relative differentiation. So it gives us a much more insight in the drivers and the motivations, the deterrents of the people. And it results in the following. Now, if we had done an agreement on the one of 10 statements, most statements would have more or less the same score. What you see here, and these are the examples, is the example for China, are the opinions on shark fin consumption, which describes people's opinion most. And so the opinion which people most agreed with, it says it's essential to protect sharks from extinction. So that's, and we color-coded them to different elements here. So all the light green ones are statements which are related to conservation and shark protection. The light blue are the uniqueness, the dark blue are social pressure, the yellow are the symbolic value, and the red ones are the health benefits. Now you can see also for shark fins nurture and cure skin conditions, that was mentioned quite frequently in China. We don't have time particularly to look at the same max differentiation opinions for Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, but for those countries or markets, it's coming a lot lower. Yeah, so in China, people look at conservation, but also at the other benefits. And actually, shark fin soup is tasteless, something which is mentioned by quite a few people who don't eat shark fin soup. This is not the case according to most shark fin soup consumers. Shark fin soup is tasteless is the one people least agree with. So that's not an opinion we should use in any campaigns, because most consumers basically do not agree with that statement. So it would be a useless message in a campaign because people don't agree with it. What we see here is that the messaging which resonates most are related to extinction, conservation, protection, and also the cruelty. So those are the 3, and actually we see across those 4 markets, we see the same 3 leading opinions. Yeah, so the leading views are, as we just saw in a large overview, I'm giving you only the summary here. The leading views are, it's essential to protect sharks from extinction. Shark fins are harvested in a very cruel way, and I think people do know that nowadays. It has been too often on social media and television to not know this. And also, a lot of people agree with the government ban on shark fin harvesting. So the shark fin harvesting is more the fishery, how we do it. So people agree that actually there should be a ban on the way how shark fins are harvested, and because it's a cruel manner. All the deterrents are actually say, okay, shark fin soup can be quite easily substituted, and we gave the examples earlier by the different products, by the different culinary dishes. So from a restaurant perspective, most consumers actually would be happy if shark fin would be taken off the menu. And if it's being replaced by a good substitute, then actually most people do definitely not care. And I think, again, this is one of the messaging what we could use also in the industry, in the sector. And for those people who work for NGOs who work a lot with restaurants, like the MSC, but also WWF, if you tell restaurant owners, restaurant culinary chefs, that they say shark fin soup is a necessity, most consumers actually don't care. They believe it can be replaced by others. And a lot of people believe that the tradition of shark fin soup will soon fade out, except perhaps in mainland China, where we have a lot more DieHard consumers. Let's look at the other way. We looked at drivers. Let's look at the deterrents. And here we summarize the deterrents again. So deterrents are reasons why people still continues to have shark fin soup. So of course they are drivers. And the leading drivers, it's a tradition in the Chinese culture. Yeah, so a good banquet, a good reunion banquet, a wedding banquet does need to have shark fin soup. Not at least to give face to the parents, to the people who organize the banquet. The quality is important, and a lot of people believe actually that shark fin soup tastes great. So actually the taste, it's an important driver to consume shark fin soup. And what I've seen also personally in Hong Kong, and I've been living here for almost 20 years, that actually a lot of people don't really care about eating shark fin soup, but they believe it's embarrassing to refuse it during a wedding banquet. And of course, in a wedding banquet, you know, it's a wedding. You don't want to create embarrassment. You don't want to be difficult for the people, for those two people. It's meant to be the most happiest day of their lives, or the parents-in-law who have organized the banquet. So a lot of people actually don't or prefer not to consume shark fin soup, but don't want to create embarrassment at a very important social occasion and do it anyway. Other drivers are, as we've seen before in China, the nurture and the cure of skin conditions. And in Hong Kong and Taiwan, it's definitely to please the elderly, something which we saw earlier. Combining all these different elements, this is actually a summary of the main relationships. Now, this is definitely can be a confusing chart. I'm going to explain it a bit later to you, but of course, this requires on itself a much broader explanation. I'm just showing you here how the whole complex situation is of consuming shark fin soup. What's most important actually is the final outcome. We call it these dependent drivers. It's the consumption, it's point number 6. And the consumption is being driven or being deterred by all the different elements which we've seen earlier. The social pressure to consume, it's the main reason to consume shark fin soup. And that's actually the social pressure, are the traditions, it's to please the elders, it's the conformism to the situation which you're in. We have other reasons why people consume shark fin soup. It's uniqueness, it's the taste, it's the quality, it's the texture of the shark fin soup. So that's the reason why people consume. The symbolic value, and that of course counteracts with the conservation, because conservation, shark protection, the cruelty, a ban on shark fin soup, those are elements actually which have a negative effect on consumption. And then particularly for mainland China, health benefits like the belief it cures the skin, it results in longevity, it's good for manliness and all those, call it beliefs, those are all reasons to consume. Now, in the last part, and I'm getting there in a minute of this presentation, we also showed visuals, we showed campaign examples, and then we asked consumers again, do you still think you're going to continue shark fin soup? And we see a red arrow here, and I'm having an oval around it for consumption before seeing the visual and after seeing the visual. So all these different combinations, and I'm going to run through it one more time to make sure we all understand it. So we have this part analysis, which shows the conditions between consumption, the reasons to consume. Yeah, so we show the social pressure, the association with shark fin soup, like a great taste, the added, so those are positive issues. We looked at conservation concerns, which actually are negative on consumption. We have health benefits, and we have symbolic value. So again, that's how this whole thing works. And by understanding how the drivers work and the deterrents work, we can address for different groups, different elements. And again, this hour is not long enough to show you all the examples, but some groups care more about social pressure. Some groups, especially millennials and younger people, care more about conservation. And some people care about health benefits. So if we can convince people actually there's no health benefit to consume shark fin soup, then we also take away one of the motivators to consume the soup. Yeah, so these are the elements which we should use in the overall intervention campaigns. And to make it a bit scientifically, we have been calculating, and this is called with the statistical analysis, the strengths of each of these drivers. Now, this is just an illustration of the scientific approach we've been using. I'm not going into here to explain it exactly. It more demonstrates how it all works, how the drivers work, how the deterrents work, and what we can do with it. So again, the uniqueness and health benefits, they have a positive relationship on past consumption. Those are reasons why people have consumed shark fin soup. The symbolic value is not a driver on itself, but on itself, people, it's impacting. For those people who consume shark fin soup, I think the most negative relationship, and there you can see the two yellow circles, It's the consumption before and consumption after exposure of campaigns. And this is how it works in real life. Yeah, in real life, some people might be ignorant and consume shark fin soup. And after seeing campaigns, they're going to change their behavior. And that, of course, is specifically the reason why we do these campaigns. That's the reason why we've done this survey. That's the reason why we uncover the motivations of consumers. And by understanding consumers, we can come up with the right messaging, and by having the right messaging, we can change behavior. And that's what we want. So let's go finally to the behavior. We've seen here that ingrained drivers of consumption are social pressure, its uniqueness, and it's the role of luxury and status. Which brings me to the last part. And here we're going to the last section. So we showed different stimuli, different messaging to respondents in the survey. So we, in the last part of the questionnaire, and all the questions, all the results, which you just seen earlier, came before this messaging. At the final part, we demonstrated, we replicated real life. We looked at, this is what real consumers see. And let's measure their effect on the attitude. Let's see how they may be changed or not. Yeah, so these pictures are influencing the results, which as it would happen in real life when you see a campaign either on billboards or on social media or on television about shark fin harvesting. This is what people saw. You can see here, this is how it happened in reality. You see here a roof terrace in Hong Kong with thousands and thousands of shark fin soup. You have 15 to 20,000 fins. You can see here a huge great white which is being slashed the fins off. You can see here all the shark fins from hammerheads or from, I think, a reef tip sharks being bleeding to death on the floor of the sea. So this is what people saw in the survey. And we asked it, what do you think? Which messaging do you believe would be most effective to change the behavior? And we look more, say, we had different messaging on extinction, and this is the text that people saw in the survey. We looked at animal cruelty, we looked at health issues, we looked again at illegality, at luxury and status, and specifically for China, we also looked at issues of the law. Now, this is what people saw in the questionnaire. They could read it, and since it was an online questionnaire, they had some time for it. And then we asked them to rank what works best. What's your message, which you believe is going to change behavior of shark fin soup consumers, including yourself? And everywhere across the 4 markets, the messaging on extinction resonate most. You can argue, is that working in reality? Potentially yes, and sometimes it does not. But this, at least, it shows it resonates with people, from 34% in China, 30% in Hong Kong, 36% in Taiwan, and 33% in Singapore. A message which people resonate. It works. At least people believe it has a strong impact. And if you look at the shark protection, you say, okay, those messaging, as you can see here, work strongest. The second one is about animal cruelty. Yeah, so if we have to come up with a messaging what, according to our survey, works best among the populations, among the consumers, it's about extinction and it's about cruelty, how we can change people's behavior. Maybe not always about DieHard consumers, but that's only 20 to 25%. All the rest of the people, the persuadables and the rejectors, are being influenced by this. So summing up all this, and of course I could continue for another 2 or 3 hours. We did 3 hours of workshop in Hong Kong, but the campaign support shows that 6 out of 10 consumers intend to support a campaign, and even more, 8 out of 10 in mainland China and Taiwan. People say, we are going to support campaign, we agree we should stop consuming shark fin soup, but other people should stop doing that. So they are supporting a campaign and doing that by speaking with family and friends and reposting messaging on social media. And this is so important because, of course, everybody, especially young people across East Asia, is using social media, not at least in China, where we could use Weibo or WeChat to come across again with this messaging. I did present it here, but it's very important. Who are the most trusted messages? Who are the people who actually should tell the story? Who should bring the messaging? it is basically it's the government and it's celebrities. And of celebrities, I want to mention one name, particularly it's Yao Ming in China, but also known in the other markets. So in Hong Kong, the government and celebrities are the right people to bring up the messaging to stop eating shark fin soup. The same in Taiwan, in a vice versa, in a different order. Mainland China, the government, Singapore, the government, and journalists and family are mentioned too. So these are the people who should bring the messages across to the consumers. And I think going all after there and having this different messaging and the results, I think I'll move over to Keo back and see whether there are any questions. And since we talk so much about shark fins, and the survey was about manta rays and mobile gills as well, only one picture here. And Keo, back to you and see whether there are any questions of the audience. So, back to the audience.
That's great. Thanks very much, Wanda. Not an easy task to not an easy task to compress all of that research. I know you guys worked very hard, and there's a huge volume of data that sits underneath the slides we've been able to present today. I have some questions of my own, but I thought let's see with the participants whether there are any comments, reflections, things that they would like to know more about, and to give some time for participants to ask questions, please. People are too shy. There was somebody.
Hi, this is Monica. Yeah, can you hear me?
Hi, Monica. Yes, yeah, very well.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with raising hands on this. I actually have a couple of questions, if it's possible. In this last part, first of all, I wonder, thank you very much for the great presentation. It was really, really interesting. My question is, when you mention about sort of celebrities and government having the most sort of powerful role as messengers, did the respondents mention what kind of celebrities, for example? Did they give names or what celebrity resonate with them most?
Yes, for each country, for each market, actually is a better word, we have a different list of celebrities. So in general, I mean, the celebrity which came by far head and shoulders physically, but also in terms of stature, across was Yao Ming in China. Jackie Chan was mentioned quite frequently, but also specific government officials. So quite surprisingly, in Hong Kong, Carrie Lam was mentioned, our CEO, our head of government, was mentioned as the third most trustworthy person to bring across the message. The same with the head of state in Singapore, and some more pop star celebrities in Taiwan, in China as well. So we do have a list of celebrities for each market.
Okay, great. Thank you. Maybe I'll stop here, and then later perhaps I will ask another question. Thank you very much.
Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Mona. We've had a question in the chat box, and another hand is up. So thanks to Liz Frost for her question. She says, thanks very much for the presentation and study, very fascinating. Curious about responses, reactions, sensitivities to tradition. Did you have any insights on that, Wanda, from the study?
Yes, I mean, of course, I think one of the most important reasons why people consume shark fin soup, and especially in the markets like Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan, is it's part of a tradition in a banquet, in a reunion, in especially a wedding banquet. So that's the reason why people do this. Now, there is this great sensitivity between, on one hand, the younger generation who prefers not to consume shark fin soup, but at the same time, they don't want to embarrass the elderly. Because for the elderly, a good banquet has to include shark fin soup. And that came, of course, that came specifically out of the qualitative research where you have more time to discuss it in depth. You know, we hardly saw any people who believe they should consume shark fin soup. They only do it because it's on the menu. It shows face for the elderly. It shows face for a complete banquet. You know, you need to have it included in there. We believe that a tipping point, or perhaps we hope that a tipping point is pretty near, because we hardly saw any people, we spoke to any people, but also from our analysis, that people believe they should consume it. It's more the embarrassment not to do it. So if we can find a mechanism, if we can find the right messaging, if we can find the right story, the narrative, as we call it now in modern jargon, that people should not, that it's all outdated. It's not good for a longevity wedding. It's not good for environments to consume shark fin soup. That hopefully people do not want to include anymore. And I think what we need to further workshop with is with the results. How can we influence people before the wedding? Because once you're on the wedding table, it's too late. The shark fin soup is there, and people don't want to consume it anymore. We should make sure that people take a decision not to include shark fin soup before the dish is being prepared. So the sensitivity, it's mostly a social sensitivity. It's not that people believe they should do it because of tradition. It's more the sensitivity towards the elderly.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that. Huishim, great to hear from you again. I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Gail. Thanks for the great presentation and the extensive work that you have done. I'm just curious, like, so if a project has limited resources to conduct an extensive consumer survey like what you have done, what aspect would you advise them to focus on? I mean, let's say this is on a different species, but they want to design a demand reduction strategy as well. What aspect do you think they should focus on if they have very limited resources?
Yes, if actually we're doing already follow-up surveys. So at the moment, and I think what's important is that we continue to share the results between different markets, between different groups, between several NGOs. At the moment, we're doing a survey for WWF in Malaysia, and we're talking more specifically to restaurant owners. How can we convince restaurant owners not to include shark fin soup anymore in the banquets? How can we help them to change the perception from consumers that we need to have shark fin soup as a kind of tradition or kind of luxury? So if you have limited resources, we should look specifically at the moments when we can influence people. And influence people can be restaurant owners, it can be chefs, it can also be wedding planners, because a wedding planner may make a decision to include shark fin soup in a banquet. Or as one of our distinguished colleagues said, I think in the past, maybe we should see how we can influence the mothers-in-law who are ordering shark fin soup. Yeah, so I would say, building on all the research we've done so far, we know now what the drivers are. We know what occasions are, we know what the deterrents are. I think we need to explore further, and that actually is not just research, but also being creative in communication. How can we change the minds of the people who take the final decision? At what moment are those decisions being taken? And where is the best way to influence them? So let's not do consumer research again. I would say we know enough now about the drivers, occasions in consumption. What we may need to explore further with very limited budget to influence those people who take the decisions to include shark fin soup in the banquets.
All right, thank you. I mean, actually, sorry, I know this is taking up time, but actually I'm more thinking of, let's say this is for a totally different species. We're not talking about shark fin now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like, maybe not much research has been done in the past. So, but with limited resources, you know, like, should they focus on, for example, you know, like the what statement would appeal to them the most, or the least, or compared to, you know, other aspects of the survey? Just.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the difficulty is if you look to another species, there might be other drivers why people are consuming it. So if you look to this silhouette of a manta ray, people are consuming manta ray gills or mobile ray gills for a completely different reason as shark fin soup, right? So mobile gill rays are being used mostly in traditional Chinese medicine and for health reasons. So if you go for a different species, you may have a very different reason again. So if we talk about a different species, it depends what you know already. Yeah, so what do you know about the consumption of that species, and why are people consuming, and can it be replaced? But every species, of course, have a different opinion, so of a different motivation. So it depends very much, Flora, which kind of species you talk about, because otherwise I can't really make a judgment here.
Okay, all right, yeah, thanks a lot.
And by the way, I know we are running out of time, but if you have more questions, just email to me or via Key or via Gail. I'm happy to follow up later as well if you run out of time. Yeah.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Wanda. There are a couple. There's some coming in again from Liz and Maud Asmad. So Maud, the respondents involved in the study in each country will share the research results, and that data will be available. We'll load the signed off documents once they're available onto changewildlifeconsumers.org. Liz, some of your reflections sort of relate a little bit to something I'm curious about. So sorry to abuse chair's privilege, but Wanda, I'm curious. I mean, you know, a lot of people kind of find it easy to say that they're going to change their choice when they sort of see the environmental objectives. There's huge amounts of research in the behavioural science literature about the disconnect between you know, even the values and attitudes that people have, and then what their actions sort of result as a consequence. There's a concept quite well established called the attitude action gap, and I know it's an easy thing for people to say in surveys, in particular when presented with quite emotive narrative and visuals, which you know, you shared the slide of that. So what's your sense of to what extent we need to move beyond a little bit the traditional campaign messages? We've been campaigning for many years now on sort of using celebrities, saying very important things, trying to mobilise society around this and care. But still we're in this situation where there is high demand. What's your view on that? What sort of commentary would you offer?
Yes, Gail, of course, that's the most difficult question, right? I mean, we do all campaigns. People say they are affected by the campaigns and still consume shark fin soup. So does the campaign doesn't work or not? At least according to our research, people are being affected, but not strongly enough to confront a social awkward situation. So the social awkward situation is apparently stronger than the care for a certain species, which is far away in the sea and which we may never see. So I think what we learn from our surveys is that we have to reduce or diminish the social awkward situation. And I think maybe we can compare it to becoming a vegetarian. You know, many years ago, people were not awkward being a vegetarian, but it was not being seen as cool. And gradually, it's completely normal now to refuse meat. It's completely common now in many societies, in many situations. If you're at a banquet and you say, I don't eat meat, people respect that. So maybe we should look at similarities, how behavior changes work in other situations. If consumers can say in the future, sorry, I don't eat shark fin soup because of my beliefs, maybe it's not being seen as awkward anymore, but as respectable. So I think maybe we should move onwards to not just out the extinction, but look at matters of respect. Look at matters how people believe that, okay, if you don't want to eat shark's fin soup, that's not to embarrass me, it's because of your own belief, and it's a respectable matter. Maybe we should move on, and that's of course every messaging we're testing, and as a research consultancy, we're to a certain extent bound by the input we receive. Maybe we should move on from here, not just look at the species itself, but more what's driving people in terms of in relationship to other human beings. And most people are being driven by respect, by appreciation. If we can bring reduction of shark fin soup as a respectable thing rather than embarrassing others, maybe that's the next step of being more effective.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that reflection, Wanda. That's very helpful. If people need to shoot off, please feel free. I hope it's okay for another couple of minutes to pick up on some other questions. Thanks for your indulgence, Wanda, in particular. So one message from a lady, Lucy Erickson, are the celebrities that we talked about already against shark fin soup consumption? I mean, my sense is yes. Certainly Yao Ming's been advocating for this for some time now, as has Jackie Chan. Any thoughts from you, Wanda, to expand on that point? Or
yes, it actually was simple. It was an open-ended question, so people could fill in the names of the celebrities they felt were most appropriate. And of course, people will not fill in names of people who would not be against shark fin soup. So it was an open-ended question. People could fill in the names. So yes, those people we can assume are against it, and not those people who would be advocates of shark fin soup.
Okay, great, thank you. And then from Liz, again, just coming back, some sort of big picture reflections on reducing the occasional shark fin consumption have enough of a conservation impact if diehards continue to consume at the same level. So I guess it's this, who do we as a community prioritize for our communication? Should it be the diehards rather than the persuadables? I guess this relates to a larger point about what's the best way to achieve change? Is it that you do social mobilization first and invest all your effort in that, or should you actually take on those that are hardest to change and go down the route of diehards? I guess my own personal feeling is that yes, it's probably worth targeting the actual consumers, the diehards, and there's a mix of ways in which you can do that. But Wanda, any insight from the research that you would share?
Yeah, obviously the diehard consumers are driving the consumption, so you should always target those. But what we try to do in our surveys is to make a segmentation. So you have to make sure you have different segments with different messaging. So the people who reject, you have to make sure those are advocates. Yeah, those are the people who try to amplify and bring on the message that you should stop consuming shark fin soup. The persuadable consumers need a messaging about cruelty. So that's the people you can convince quite easily too. And of course, the difficult group, the diehard group, it's a group you need to address with different messaging. So that's the most important group. But make sure you also give them a messaging that resonates with them. And the diehard consumers look at, and of course it depends a bit per market, but they each have their own motivations, which are different than rejectors or persuadable consumers. So the most important messaging from us is make sure that you address those consumer groups with a messaging that works with them rather than across the board for everyone. And again, the diehard consumers, we should tell them basically it's honorable, it's respectable not to consume. It's not part of tradition anymore, because there's so many things which used to be a Chinese tradition. And as my Chinese colleagues always say, bounded feet and concubines also are part of Chinese tradition, but we don't use it anymore. So a tradition is not something which needs to last in the future as well.
Okay, thanks so much, Wanda. There are a couple of more questions coming in, but I think in the interests of time, maybe we have to sadly call it to a close there. Sincere thanks once more. It's a huge volume of data. I'm always immensely impressed by the way in which you pull out the key highlights. So yeah, from us, huge thanks. To respond to the latest question from Lucy and from others, yes, we will be sharing the recording here, so the slide deck will come with that, and there will be additional data that we put on changewildlifeconsumers.org. Please make sure that you keep an eye out for the next version of the newsletter. We'll make sure that we announce the release of that data in the next edition, and if you have any other queries, as everybody has probably, this is very thought-provoking, so questions may come afterwards. Very welcome to get in touch with either Kyo or myself, and anything that we can't answer, we'll field on. So over to Kyo for any final remarks, but huge thanks once more, Wanda. Great presentation, thank you.
Great, thank you, Gail, and all, of course.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Wanda and Gail. Just for the interest of time, I just want to mention that the recording will be uploaded on changewildlifeconsumers.org, And I have just sent a link because I'm not sure if I have everyone's email. I have just sent a link to subscribe to our SBCC newsletter. So if you subscribe to that, I can be able to send you the email follow-up as well as send you the link to the recording and the presentation later. And also if you want, you can also feel free to leave your email addresses in the chat and I will follow up with you through that. So I think that's it from my end, and we'll also send you information of our upcoming webinars via the newsletter and also upload it on our website. Thank you very much again, and I hope you guys enjoy the session. Thank you and goodbye.
Great, thank you everyone. I'd like to say thank you on behalf of GlobeScan. I always enjoy these presentations, so please come back to me with more questions you may have, and hopefully we can save the sharks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.